Well, thank you very much for those very kind remarks. It is great to be back here in the Republic of Korea in this, I guess, this sort of undisclosed location, 1.5 to 2 hours south of Seoul. It's a great pleasure to be here, but it's maybe not a great pleasure to be talking about North Korea once again. I sort of fear that North Korea will be the hardy perennial of academic discussions for many years to come. You know, if you look at what the world is dealing with today, in fact, if you think of the world as a sort of giant child soccer league, you'll see that everybody in the world always sort of follows the same ball. So you have this sort of grouping of everyone around this soccer ball. And today the soccer ball is, of course, Libya. So everybody in the world is kind of registering their views on what to do about Libya. There's been quite a discussion about should NATO lead the no-fly zone. In fact, there was some resolution of that this morning. Should there be some bifurcation of NATO on the military side and some sort of contact group on the political side? Should there be some actual coalition effort on the military side to bring in Arab players? What's the role of other countries? What's the role of the UN Security Council, etc.? And so everybody has kind of weighed in on this. And then we saw the other day that actually North Korea weighed on this. But North Korea, rather than talking about the question of the sort of institutional arrangements for dealing with Libya, or rather than speaking to the issue of, should Gaddafi do this or that, should there be a diplomatic track, should there be a political track within Libya to achieve some sort of reconciliation, what should be the role of sanctions, etc. North Korea actually gave us a different contribution. North Korea said it is very clear that Muammar Gaddafi never should have given up his nuclear weapons back in 2003. So we have, on the one hand, everyone in the world discussing one aspect, or many aspects of the Libya issue. On the other side, we have one country who feels that the lesson to be learned from Libya is that Gaddafi shouldn't have given up his weapons. I take from many of the statements the DPRK has made, many of the statements that we just saw here on the slides, that I think from a realistic point of view, the current North Korean regime, the current North Korean system is incapable of reaching an agreement which would result in the denuclearization of North Korea. And I think we need to accept what is certainly appearing to be a fact, and then figure out how we deal with this. I would go further. I would say, given the succession crisis in North Korea, the fact that Kim Jong-il is now Kim Jong-very ill, that Kim Jong-il has produced an heir who, how should I say, falls below the level of inspiration, that perhaps North Korea's ability to replicate itself, its system, is in fact in question. And that if we were to look at this from the point of view of an odds maker who might look at who's going to win next week's football game, the odds of North Korea somehow fundamentally changing, even to use the word collapse, so I don't really know what that means, the odds of North Korea fundamentally changing are probably greater than the odds of North Korea actually giving up, or the current North Korean political system giving up nuclear weapons. So I think we probably, as nations that are interested in the subject, as nations that have a direct interest in addressing this subject, we probably, that is the 5 of the 6 party members, probably should devote more time to what it means in a post-DPRK Korean Peninsula, what our interests are, how can we protect each other's interests as we look at this post-DPRK Korean Peninsula. Now, some may say, yes, but that's really for the future. Why should we think about these kinds of theoretical things? I would argue that that is less theoretical than North Korea giving up its nuclear weapons. So I think we should begin, first of all, looking at mechanisms, and secondly, looking at what various countries, what the dilemmas are of various countries. First of all, I truly believe that the mechanism of the six-party talks was the right mechanism and is the right mechanism for dealing with security issues on the Korean Peninsula. I might add parenthetically that I think it was very important that the United States, my country, engaged heavily in the denuclearization effort in 2005. And the reason I would say that was not so much that that engagement led to a change of mindset in North Korea. We know that it didn't. We did get some things out of it. We got them to shut down a reactor that if they didn't shut it down, that reactor could have been continuing till this day. I think there was some success in terms of trying to slow down the North Korean threat. But I think the real value of the six-party talks was in other areas. First of all, if you looked at opinion surveys in South Korea in 2003, 2004, you saw that the United States increasingly was being held to blame by an increasing number of ROK citizens. That is, the United States was considered culpable in the North Korean nuclear crisis. Incredible as that may seem to some people, many South Korean citizens were blaming the United States' unwillingness to engage as one of the reasons for a North Korean nuclear crisis. I might add that issue has completely evaporated. Very few reasonable people in the ROK now blame the United States for the North Korean crisis. Secondly, I think what we did in the six-party process was to put forward a broad range of issues for North Korea. We said that if they implement their obligations, we would implement ours. We laid out a broad range of economic, political, and security approaches. North Korea chose not to take those. In fact, North Korea, frankly, to this day, has been disinterested in any kind of collective economic approach, any kind of collective political approach, or any kind of collective security approach. Indeed, North Korea has no interest in cooperating with others, and I think we showed that to every reasonable person in the world that that was what we were prepared to do and that they rejected it. So again, I think it was valuable that we went forward, that we worked on the U.S.-South Korean relationship more than we worked on the U.S.-North Korean relationship through that time. I think the United States also demonstrated and continues to demonstrate a willingness to work very closely with China on the issues of the peninsula. I think all of these issues, apart from the actual dealing with North Korea, were valuable and should be continued. I think when you look around the five countries of the six-party process, you will indeed see dilemmas, but I think you will also see issues of mistrust of others, and that's where I think we need to use the six-party process to address some of the mistrust. For example, if North Korea in fact disappears, and in fact what I think inevitably will happen, that is South Korea becomes a successor state, what are the factors in Chinese thinking about an ROK as a successor state? What is China concerned about? Are they concerned about ROK forces located above the 38th parallel? Are they worried about perhaps ROK would take over North Korea's nuclear capabilities? Are they worried about U.S. listening posts up on the Yalu, that somehow the U.S. would look to use its relationship, its alliance with South Korea to gain a strategic advantage against China? Are these the issues that China is concerned about? And therefore, are these issues that we can talk to the Chinese about and alleviate some of these concerns? We won't know until we have a serious discussion about this. My sense is that, to start with China, that the issue that you see in the U.S. newspapers to the effect that China wants stability, China worries that North Korea could somehow implode and therefore there would be more refugees in China. I think these are cliches that, unlike most cliches, really have very little truth to them. I think China's problem is not potential North Korean refugees. China's problem is that China itself has trouble making decisions, making major decisions that are different from previous decisions. That is, China has trouble making consensus, making changes in policy. I think we have to acknowledge that in China, as in many big countries, including my own, but probably also including in the Russian Federation, China, I think, has a special problem of, let me just call it, old think. I think China has a problem that somehow a demise of North Korea, after all, the Chinese historic ally, the fellow Marxist-Leninist state, a state where China actually participated in a war outside of its borders, that somehow the demise of North Korea would mean a loss for China and a gain for China's adversary, that is the United States. So I think this kind of zero-sum old think is very much in existence in Chinese decision-making circles, and it is one of the issues that has prevented China from achieving a consensus to change its policy. I do not believe that China looks at North Korea or looks at the issue of stability in North Korea from an economic point of view, because when you talk to China's economic elites, they seem to be very disinterested in North Korea. One has the impression they would like to be finished with North Korea, done with North Korea, so they can get on with China's real interests, which exist in other parts of the world, including in the U.S. market. I think the problem China has with North Korea does not come from China's economic elites, but rather comes from rather old think political and security elites, including in the People's Liberation Army. And I think those are things, those are attitudes that need to be addressed, not just in Track 2 fora, where they are addressed already, but also in some Track 1 fora. And I would put forward the six-party talks as a way to continue a dialogue, to continue to talk about these things in the rubric of future political and security and economic arrangements. I think it can be done. So I think this dealing with China's old think is a very important issue. One thing that I worry about in the United States, whether it's from the U.S. left or the U.S. right, is every time there's a crisis on North Korea, the tendency is we've got to go deal directly with the North Koreans. Now, the U.S. right, when the issues come up, they want to go right at the North Koreans with some kind of threatening military posture. The U.S. left wants to go right at the North Koreans with still another delegation, hat in hand, to try to plead with the North Koreans to understand that we're really their friend and we really like them, etc. I think the U.S. needs to abandon this type of approach of going right at North Korea and simply understand that North Korea is a thing rather than a country, and a thing that if we're ever going to solve that thing, we're going to do it with a much stronger and much more comprehensive approach with the ROK. The United States has a tremendous relationship with the ROK today, but I think we can improve that relationship if we can, going back to the previous point on China, if the U.S. and ROK can have intensive discussions in anticipation of, let me call them, five-party discussions, so that when the ROK talks to China and when when the U.S. talks to China, these are coordinated approaches and not approaches where the Chinese feel that they can look for differences. So in short, I think the reaction to North Korean provocations on the Korean Peninsula should not be U.S. approaches to North Korea, but should in fact be very strong approaches or very strong effort at working with the South Koreans. I think this is the case. Certainly the Obama administration, I think, has done a very good job of this, but I think more needs to be done. I think in terms of Russia's participation in the six-party talks, this is something that I think Russian leadership, opinion elites in far, far away Moscow need to sit down and need to understand that this is very important to Russia, that the maritime Far East is more than a slogan for Russia. It really is an area of security and economic interest for Russia. And I would like to see a much stronger Russian approach on the issues of the peninsula and a willingness to free itself from past relationships with North Korea, and again, look forward to what the situation could look like in the future without North Korea. Six-party talks. So I would like to see a continued effort on everybody's part that some of us in the U.S. For example, if you believe, as I have set out, that I believe, that the real issue is the successor state question, is the real issue, that how to absorb North Korea, it is quite understandable that South Koreans don't want to absorb a country where many people have been permanently affected by malnutrition. Therefore, if the South Koreans make a decision to provide food aid, it is not for us to criticize that decision. It's for us to understand it. It's for us to be in consultation and not to be surprised by it. But we need to understand that South Korea has a different perspective when it looks at some 20 million people who could someday be its citizens. So I think it's important in the United States to understand these dilemmas of South Korea. Similarly, I believe that South Korea does need to continue some kinds of cooperation with North Korea. I would argue cooperation such as Kaesong is a good thing. I would argue that Kumgang Mountain is a less than a good thing, because I think the Kumgang Mountain cooperation was based on simply giving money to North Korea rather than giving the kinds of skills, giving the kinds of education that Kaesong does. Because when North Korea finally collapses, people will see that the difficulties of North Korea, the problems in North Korea could go deeper than Kim Jong-il or Kim Jong-un. That in fact North Korea has many, many problems that will require generations to fix. And in addressing those generational problems, South Korea will need to be engaged in things like Kaesong, and probably engaged at some point in some sort of humanitarian assistance in North Korea. Obviously, in the meantime, we do have an ongoing nuclear threat. I believe that the United States and all of these countries, we need to do a lot more in terms of understanding what that threat is. We did not know enough about the uranium enrichment issue. We had data points that were some 8 to 10 years old. We did not have enough data points to predict how far that the North Koreans had gone with uranium enrichment. And it seems to me that all of us in our security services, our intel services, ought to be looking for ways to increase our capacity to understand and to monitor what is actually going on. And obviously, if possible, to interdict it as well. So I think there has to be a greater willingness to invest in intelligence activities to make sure that we can fully understand and fully predict North Korean threats. For now, I think North Korea is going to be a threat. I would argue it's more of a threat to itself than to anyone else. But we need to be vigilant, and we need, especially and most importantly, to work together. And in the context of working together, I can think of no better mechanism than to do that than the six-party process. Thank you very much.